Oops, caught me. Hello. Paul Krugman. Again, link. This will be a presentation, so you're looking at it. Article, New York Times, 30th of March, Conscience of a Liberal, Banking Mysticism. Ha ha ha, mysticism. Continued. So it's gone. Keane, Krugman. The Keane reply to Krugman's article in the New York Times, whenever it was, a week ago, wasn't very good, but I think it was because he was in transit from Australia to Europe to do a few speaking engagements in Europe before he gets to the Berlin conference. But although it wasn't very good, it was still better than Paulie's. And so Paulie's now replying again with his update, 30th of March. Links obviously there. Please have a look at it and see if you can make more of it than I did. I really struggled with this. I just thought in the end, if it had to be anything, it was a man that was just going blah, 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 blah. But see if you can understand what he's talking about. Anyway, I'll give you the first couple of paragraphs. It's obvious that many commentators don't get the distinction between the proposition that banks create money, which every economics textbook, in mine included, says they do. So we're fine with banks creating money. That's what the multiplier is all about. Now, there are a couple of different multipliers out there in economics, but on this one, I'm really not sure what PK is talking about. I've given it a little bit of thought. I've given it... No, don't know what you're talking about, PK. I think he's got latched onto something to do with fractional reserve banking. And I'll give you a hint, a tip here. If you're trying to work out what this banking system is and what I'm talking about, what he's talking about, try and forget fractional reserve banking. I have found that although you can put it in there, it's a very uncomfortable fit. It is far, far easier to just forget absolutely everything to do with fractional reserve banking and just go straight with what we're talking about here. Banks create money, find the deposits later. And reserves, like for Australia and Canada and other countries like the United States where the reserves are absolutely minimum, don't come into it. Banks aren't reserve constrained. They are capital constrained. And hopefully you've bored stiff with me pushing out the difference between capital constraint and reserve constraint, aren't you? Because you know that off by heart now. Banks are capital constrained in the amount of lending they can do. They are not reserve constrained. Right, where was I with PK? Oh, on his multiplier. I just didn't understand it. Okay. And the proposition that their ability to create money is not constrained by the monetary base. Sigh. Paulie says sigh. And I'm not really sure what he's sighing about. Anyway, he says that this is a follow-up from the previous post, which was the reply to Keane. As I read various stuff on banking, now I think this is a Freudian slip. As I read various stuff on banking, or is this as I read various stuff on banking? I think it's as I read various stuff on banking. I think he has been found himself getting some banking books out of the library and giving them a read. And now is going... Anyway, read the article, see how much you can find. Anyway, comments here, but also various writings here and there. See, it's nonsense. Most of the article, I think, is nonsense. He's struggling. Anyway, I often see the view that banks can create credit out of thin air. Lovely. This is a deep joy to have Krugman even saying that in the New York Times. Banks can create credit out of thin air. It would have been slightly better if he said money out of thin air, but creating credit out of thin air is just the phrase that, for me, you've got the MMT side and the banking side. For the banking side, that's the phrase that needs to be floated out there. So lots of people go, we need to either put this one back in the box, or we need to really discuss exactly what this is. Okay, and that's what PK is trying to do. So I bless his little cotton socks. I often see the view that banks can create credit out of thin air. There are vehement denials of the proposition that banks' lending is limited by their deposits, or that the monetary base plays an important role. Banks, we're told, hardly hold any reserves, which is true. That's the first thing he said that I can really latch onto and say, well, that's a fact. So the Fed's creation or destruction of reserves has no effect. And again, you go, I don't know now what he's talking about. I don't know if he's referring to the way he said it was in the last article, or if he's gone over to, read his banking books and has gone over to what Keane was saying. I don't know what he's actually talking about now. But I won't read you any more of the article, but I'd obviously encourage you to go and have a look for yourselves. I've just dragged out some comments which I think, for a lot of you who aren't as odd as me, haven't latched on, because it's my thing, obviously, this banks thing and this MMT thing. It's my thing. I can't expect it to be your thing. But if there's one thing that should be, for me, it's a great cannon blast that should blast anybody that's sitting there going, well, what's Mystic getting excited about? Should come out from this comment interchange, which is a bit of an odd comment interchange, but it does get out what is getting me. Okay, so let me get this straight. This is Paul J., Florida. There is roughly $54 trillion in credit outstanding. Now, that's another fact. You can get it from the Federal Bank of New York's Z1, and you find that there's $54 trillion of credit outstanding. United States, not the world, United States. Now, I didn't really understand this paragraph, but I'll read it. The government, through deficit spending, has created about $15 trillion. Okay, we understand that. The actual deficit that the Congress is going on and on about so much, 15 trillion, we know that. That's fine. And treasuries, of which maybe 5 trillion is cash that could be deposited in a bank. Now, that's the bit I really don't know about. Is it to do with the Social Security Fund? I really don't know. But the 49 trillion, so he's taken the 5 off, so we're down to 50 trillion. 49 trillion didn't come from thin air, question mark. But the 49 trillion didn't come from thin air, question mark. Okay. Dan P. from Warrensburg replies. Now, I'll read this, although I don't understand it. Not from thin air. The federal debt was financed by bond purchases. Now, the rest of that paragraph I do not understand, didn't follow at all, but he says the federal debt was financed by bond purchases there. And the second paragraph, pause and read if you like, but it ends with, I don't understand it either. But what he's saying, the federal debt was financed by bond purchases. Okay, that's what Danny says. And Paul J. from Florida comes back with, quoting Danny, not from thin air, the federal debt was financed by bond purchases, which in this case take the place of bank reserve currency. Now, don't get too carried away with bank reserve currency. So, Paul J., and this is where you can come in again. And the dollars the bond purchasers used to buy the bonds? Question mark. He's trying to, cart and horse, which come, hey, it's fine to say the bonds were bought, but what bought them? Money, cash, credit. Tricky. Where did they come from? These trillions of dollars. Immaculate conception. Dollars have always just existed in infinite quantities. Where did all these dollars come from? And in a way, this is what my banking, MMT, is trying to wheedle out and fact into the mystic brain and hopefully help you, the rest of you. At day one, this is going back into history, we as a country had effectively zero money. Where did all the trillions of dollars that we have borrowed come from? Now, he finishes with the government created them out of thin air. Okay, so we've got facts. We've got the country as a start with no dollars. Now we have $50 trillion of things that people call money, dollars. They might be in treasury bills, but you accept that those treasury bills can be swapped for dollars. It's just credit, dollars of credit. So started at 0 and went to 50 trillion, 0 to 50 trillion, which is what's the GDP of the United States? 15 trillion. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. If it was 55, about that. We're talking huge quantities of money. That's the GDP of, more than the GDP of the entire world for a year. 50 trillion. Okay. A lot of money. Now, that has come into existence somehow. It has either come through banking or through the government. Either the banks print it into existence or the government prints it into existence. And what the mystic mind wants to know is, how much has the government done and how do they do it? How much have the banks done and how did they do it? Because we're talking $50 trillion of money creation. Now, we've got a bottom left, top right thing going on from $0 up to $50 trillion for the United States. You know, it isn't just, I mean, it goes, and then it takes off because it's numerical. But let's say it's bottom left, top right. It's just increasing. The thing about Paul Krugman and his models doesn't have this active increase. It takes snapshots through the economy and says, at the moment that there is this much money. He's talking about fucking cash in this article. I think he's really flailing about. He takes a snapshot through the economy and says that there is this much money owned by A or B, and either A spending or B spending it. And this is the argument that it's a snapshot. And his models projects onwards that there is that much amount of money. But what Keen's saying is, listen, lad, it started at 0 and now it's at 50 trillion. I project it's a dynamic thing and it will keep increasing. Or it might decrease, and that must be taken into account. But if you're going to have a model that models the future, you can't just carve it straight down the middle and say this is the amount of money. You've got to take into account that there was this amount of money which was smaller, and soon there's going to be an awful lot more money. But PK's models don't do that. It's just sliced through and stagnant modelling. But Keen's models are dynamic modelling, taking into account where we've come from and where we might be going. And that base is the basis of the disagreement. But PK has to admit where all this money is coming from first. And as soon as he admits where it's all coming from, he has to admit that his model does not take it into account. But I couldn't give a shit. For me, I want to know about this bank creating money and government creating money and where all this $50 trillion has come from, because it is out there and it didn't used to be. It's good stuff. It's fabulous to have it out there. It's in the New York Times by Paul Krugman now. It's absolutely marvellous, and it's inevitable, as in it can't be avoided now. Everybody has got to now have an opinion on these things, and to have an opinion they've got to really shake an awful lot of facts into place, which is just what I've been trying to do and so far failing. So hopefully they'll get on and do it for me, and I'll just read what all the wonderful answers are and I'll believe them. I'll choose who I believe, but I think we're getting there. I'm getting there, and they now are going to help me. There is such thing as a free lunch. Bye.